one envelope, one set of photographs, and one morning that shattered the illusion of a royal marriage built on defiance. King Charles began the day as a husband and ended it as a man betrayed. It was June 25, 2025, and the palace was still cloaked in the gentle quiet of early morning. For Charles, these hours were sacred time to sip his Earl Grey, review the day's briefings, and find a semblance of calm before the machinery of monarchy roared to life. But that morning, the calm did not last. Beneath the familiar stack of parliamentary updates and ceremonial schedules lay a plain, unmarked envelope. No royal crest, no signature, just his name, written in sharp, deliberate strokes, as though the hand that penned it wanted to be remembered. He hesitated, his instincts whispering caution. But curiosity, and perhaps something deeper, a gnawing sense that this envelope was not meant for a future hour, compelled him to tear it open. Inside was a dossier, thick with high-resolution stills, each stamped with precise dates and times. May 11th, May 12th, May 13th. His eyes narrowed as he took in the first image. There was no mistaking her. Camilla, the woman he had defended for decades, the woman he had risked his public standing for, caught in a private embrace with a man he recognized instantly, Edward Langley, a former royal aide whose history with her stretched back to 1999. The photos told their own story, arms entwined on a sunlit terrace, wine glasses half full, a shadowed silhouette in the glow of a private suite's window. 3 days, 3 opportunities to be anywhere else, and she had chosen to be there with him. At first, Charles wanted to believe there was some logical explanation. A reunion with an old friend, perhaps. A chance encounter misinterpreted by a camera's lens. But the pit in his stomach deepened with every page he turned. There was no ambiguity in the closeness, no plausible deniability in the way they looked at each other. When the initial shock began to thaw, anger crept in, cold and calculating. This was not the rash impulse of a moment. It felt orchestrated, deliberate. Within hours, palace intelligence confirmed what Charles already knew in his bones. The photographs were real. The dates were accurate. The transport logs placed Edward at a Windsor-adjacent estate for the exact duration of Camilla's so-called wellness retreat. Entry and exit records lined up perfectly. Private security footage corroborated the stills, leaving no room for the comfort of doubt. The betrayal was not just personal, but political. This wasn't merely a wife's infidelity, it was a queen consort's recklessness, a crack in the facade of royal unity, carefully cultivated over decades. And yet, even as Charles tried to steady himself, there was an undertow dragging him deeper into suspicion, because among the intelligence notes, there was a single line, almost an afterthought, that froze him in place. It wasn't about Edward Langley at all. It was about an unusual palace security log, dated weeks earlier, tied directly to Camilla. One detail that had nothing to do with romance, but everything to do with legacy. It whispered of something far darker than an affair. Something that would threaten the very memory of Diana herself. Affairs can be forgiven in whispers. Theft from the heart of the monarchy cannot. The photographs had left Charles reeling, but it was the buried detail in the intelligence report that now consumed his thoughts. A date, a security code, and an entry in the palace logs that should never have existed. April 2025. The Royal Heirloom Vault, a place guarded not just by steel and protocol but by tradition itself, had been accessed with a dormant override code decommissioned more than a decade ago. The code belonged to an era long past, one Charles had personally ordered retired after his mother's death. Yet, there it was, used by none other than Camilla. That same morning, at precisely 9:42 a.m., she was seen leaving the vault's restricted wing. 3 hours later, a locked trunk, its weight straining the hands of 2 attendants, was discreetly moved through a service corridor to her private car. There was no entry in the artifact checkout system. No record of inspection. The trunk was driven away. Destination: her Windsor retreat. The same Windsor retreat that would later host Edward Langley. To anyone else, it might have looked like an ordinary day in the life of a queen consort. But for the keepers of the crown's treasures, this was an anomaly too sharp to ignore. When the quarterly audit was completed in late May, 2 items were missing. They were not just valuable, they were irreplaceable. Diana's caterpillar earrings, gifted by the Emir of Qatar in 1986, and the Spencer choker, a wedding gift steeped in family history. Together, their worth was appraised at 650. But their true value was beyond any currency. These pieces had been earmarked for Princess Charlotte's future, a living bridge between Diana's memory and the next generation. Now, they are gone. Palace security combed through footage from April 2020. There, in grainy but undeniable frames, was the trunk being loaded into Camilla's vehicle. She had been smiling faintly, speaking to the driver as though nothing were amiss. The cameras captured the time, the license plate, even the faint shimmer of the trunk's brass hinges. Still, without confirmation of its contents, the matter remained locked behind a wall of suspicion. Staff spoke in hushed tones in corridors and service kitchens, their concerns carefully noted in internal reports, but never voiced aloud. She was, after all, the Queen. Charles knew the palace could survive rumors of an affair. It could even weather the humiliation of betrayal. But the theft of Diana's legacy, removing pieces of royal history under the pretense of privilege, was an assault on the monarchy's soul. It demanded action. In the quiet of his private study, Charles gave the order to the intelligence unit. His voice was steady, almost cold. Follow the trunk, follow the man. And what they found didn't just confirm infidelity. It proved Camilla was rewriting royal history for someone who had no claim to it. The door closed, the staff dismissed. The king did not shout. He didn't need to. The air in the blue room was heavy, almost still, as Charles stood with the weight of a crown on his shoulders and the weight of betrayal in his hands. It was July 1st, 2025, and he had chosen this room deliberately as a place where formality met finality, where truths could be spoken without the walls themselves whispering them away. Camilla entered with the poise of someone accustomed to royal confrontations, but she did not yet understand the scale of the evidence laid out before her. Charles began without preamble. One by one, he placed the photographs before her. Edward Langley's face, her own, the Windsor estate, the wine glasses, the embraces. He spoke little, allowing the silence between each page to speak louder than his voice. Then came the vault logs, printed and time-stamped. Each line an unshakable record of where she had been, when she had been there, and how she had gained access. Alongside them, copies of encrypted messages recovered from her private tablet. The words so intimate, so loaded, they left no doubt of their meaning. Camilla's initial response was soft, almost rehearsed. "An old friend," she said. "A wellness retreat. You were busy with Parliament." But each explanation was met with another piece of evidence, another date, another code. The timing was too precise, the coincidences too many. Her voice faltered as Charles slid the final page across the table to the missing heirloom list. His eyes locked on hers when he spoke of Diana's pearl earrings, the very ones last seen in the royal vault and later gleaming on the ears of Laura Lopes at a palace luncheon. For the first time, Camilla's composure cracked. She stammered, unable to weave a believable path between the truth and the story she had tried to sell. The justification she reached for was thin, almost desperate. A misunderstanding, a personal gift. But Charles's voice cut through it, low and unyielding. "You didn't just betray me. You betrayed the memory of the woman I couldn't protect." Those words were more than accusations. They were a verdict. In them was the echo of decades, the ghost of Diana's heartbreak, the public scandals that once nearly dismantled the monarchy, and the fragile trust that had taken years to rebuild. The silence that followed was not a pause but a rupture, a point from which there could be no return. Camilla looked away, but the room offered no escape. The evidence was indisputable, the betrayal complete. And though Charles said nothing more in that moment, his decision was already forming an irreversible choice between a compromised marriage and the preservation of the crown. But Charles wasn't the only one preparing to act. Princess Anne had been watching, waiting, and she was about to strike with surgical precision. It wasn't a confrontation, it was a trap, and Camilla walked right into it. June 29th, 2025, had been marked as a celebration day to honor Princess Charlotte's milestone in charity work. The setting was intimate, the guest list carefully curated, the atmosphere seemingly warm. But beneath the polite smiles and quiet clinking of glasses, another purpose simmered, one that had nothing to do with philanthropy and everything to do with truth. Catherine had come prepared, not to start a scene, but to watch, to wait, and to let the evidence expose itself. It happened before the first course was served. Across the room, seated by the north-facing windows, Laura Lopes caught the sunlight just right. The glint was unmistakable, 3 cascading pearls tipped with diamonds. Their design so distinct that even without the catalog, Catherine knew exactly what they were. These were the 1,986 pearl drop earrings, a gift to Diana from the Emir of Qatar, worn only on rare, significant occasions. They were also the very same earrings now listed as missing from the royal vault. Catherine didn't blink. She didn't look away. She simply observed, her mind already calculating the steps to come. When the moment was right, Catherine approached Laura with calm precision. There was no raised voice, no hint of the accusation that burned beneath her composed exterior. "Where did you get those earrings?" she asked, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Laura hesitated just for a moment before replying, "A gift from Mum." The words were delivered casually, but the weight of them was seismic. That was all Catherine needed. Unbeknownst to Laura, the palace gemologist was already on standby. Security alerts from weeks prior had prepared them for exactly this scenario. The earrings were handed over discreetly, examined, and within minutes, authenticated beyond doubt. The serial mark, the clasp design, the craftsmanship, all confirmed they were the originals. The same pair intended for Princess Charlotte's 18th birthday, nearly 2 decades away. The confirmation moved through the luncheon like a silent current. No announcements were made, but everyone felt the shift. William was brought aside and told the findings in private. His reaction was measured, but the single word he gave in response was enough to chill the air. Confirmed. It was not just an acknowledgement of fact, it was a final verdict on what Camilla had done. Around the table, the glances changed. The smiles became tighter, conversations slowed, and the once celebratory mood was replaced by something heavier. An unspoken agreement that the queen consort had crossed a line from which she could never return. Camilla herself seemed unaware of the full weight of the moment, but Catherine knew, so did William, and so did everyone in the room who understood the symbolic theft they had just witnessed. By the next sunrise, the royal council would gather in secrecy and decide the fate of the queen consort. 5 people in a room, 1 crown at stake, 1 name to erase. On July 3rd, 2025, the blue drawing room of Buckingham Palace became the war room of a monarchy under siege. There were no aides, no secretaries, no courtiers to soften the edges. Only King Charles, Prince William, Princess Catherine, Princess Anne, and the palace's constitutional advisor sat around the polished table, the air heavy with the weight of centuries and the urgency of the present moment. The door was locked. No sound from the corridors could seep in. What was about to be decided here would never appear in the court circular, yet it would alter the shape of the royal family forever. Charles spoke first, his voice controlled but steely, reciting the facts with the precision of a man who had rehearsed this in his mind every sleepless night since the envelope arrived. He laid out the photographs of Camilla and Edward Langley, each one stamped with times and dates impossible to dispute. Then came the gemologist's report, verifying without question that Diana's pearl drop earrings meant for Charlotte's future had been worn at that fateful luncheon by Camilla's daughter. Finally, the vault accessed logs and security records, each entry an ironclad piece of a puzzle no one in the room wished to see completed, yet could no longer ignore. Anne leaned forward, her expression sharpened into something between outrage and resolve. Her words were knives, deliberate and unflinching. She used our mother's name and grief as a bargaining chip. It wasn't just disgust in her tone. It was a declaration that this was no longer a private scandal, but an insult to the monarchy's very bloodline. William had remained silent until then, hands clasped in front of him, his gaze fixed on the table. When he finally spoke, the words were quiet, but carried a force that settled like a verdict over the room. "My mother was erased once. We won't let it happen again." It was not a plea, nor a suggestion. It was a vow, the kind that binds not just a man, but a dynasty. The constitutional advisor broke the silence with the mechanics of what must come next. Actions that, while bloodless in execution, would be fatal in consequence. Within hours, Camilla's palace access would be revoked. All vault codes would be changed. Her staff reassigned without notice. Her security detail was suspended. There would be no ceremonial appearances, no audiences, no duties. The title of Queen Consort would remain in the official record, but in function, she would be nothing more than a shadow with no role to play. Charles signed the directives without hesitation. Each stroke of the pen severed another tie between his wife and the institution she had sworn to serve. Around the table, no one spoke again. There was nothing left to debate. By the time the meeting ended, the Queen Consort had been reduced to a figurehead in name only, exiled in all but public acknowledgement. But no palace secret stays buried for long, and the next morning, the world would know everything. By dawn, Buckingham Palace wasn't just a royal residence. It was ground zero for a global scandal. The morning of July 6, 2025, broke with headlines that tore through the monarchy's carefully maintained image like a blade. Queen Camilla in secret affair and jewel theft scandal. The words dominated every front page, their weight magnified by the images that accompanied them, clear, damning photographs of Camilla in intimate moments with Edward Langley during her so-called wellness retreat. Alongside them, detailed proof from palace security logs and gemologist reports confirmed what had already been whispered in the corridors of power. The royal vault had been breached, and two of Diana's most treasured heirlooms had vanished. It was not the kind of story that simmered quietly. It ignited. Within minutes of publication, social media transformed into a digital coliseum. Hashtags like cheating queen, legacy betrayed, and not my queen trended in over 90 countries. Viral posts compared footage of Diana wearing the iconic 1,986 pearl drop earrings to recent images of Camilla's daughter, flaunting them at the luncheon. For the public, it was no longer just about betrayal in marriage. It was about a theft of memory, a hijacking of legacy. Each repost, each angry comment, fueled a narrative the palace could no longer control. The outrage was visceral, personal. For many, Diana was more than a princess. She was a symbol of grace. To see her treasures in the possession of someone outside the bloodline was an insult that cut across generations. Within 24 hours, polling numbers reflected the fury. Camilla's approval rating collapsed to 21%, the lowest since she had entered royal life. In sharp contrast, Catherine soared to 85%, a reflection not just of sympathy, but of trust. She was now seen as the guardian of what remained untarnished in the monarchy. Inside the palace, the reaction was quieter, but no less charged. While aides worked frantically to manage the press, no official statement addressed the exile that had already been enacted in private. The only confirmation given was that the Queen Consort's operational duties had been temporarily suspended. That thin veil of ambiguity fooled no one. Every journalist, every commentator, every royal watcher knew this was more than a pause. It was the prelude to something permanent. And yet, for all the noise outside, the monarchy itself remained publicly silent. That silence was not a weakness. It was preparation. Behind closed doors, the final moves were being readied, the kind that would not just strip Camilla of influence, but ensure she would never again hold the reins of royal power. That silence would break not in a press release, but in a royal order that could never be undone. No formal banishment, no public trial, just locked gates forever. On the morning of July 7, 2025, King Charles III took pen to paper and signed what would become the quietest yet most devastating order of his reign. It was a confidential directive, sealed under royal authority, stripping Camilla of all operational standing within the monarchy. Her title, Queen Consort, would remain for the sake of protocol, but it was now nothing more than an empty shell, a ceremonial husk without the influence, privilege, or power that once came with it. The orders were absolute. All palace access codes tied to her name were revoked. Every entry to the vaults, archives, and council chambers was blocked. The staff of Clarence House, once the nerve center of her daily operations, were reassigned before the week was out. Camilla's security detail was stood down without ceremony, replaced by a minimal presence that served more to monitor than to protect. The final line of the directive left no room for ambiguity. She could not set foot in any royal residence again without the king's written permission. It was exile in everything but name, calculated, clinical, and irreversible. By nightfall, the move was complete. Camilla was transported under a shroud of discretion to Ray Mill House in Wiltshire, her private estate, far from the pulse of royal life. The relocation was swift, designed to avoid both the press and the curious eyes of the public. Neighbors saw nothing more than the faint hum of vehicles at odd hours. Her children visited briefly in the days that followed, but they slipped away quietly. avoiding reporters at all costs. Those few who had been in her presence described her as pale, hollow, and stripped of the confidence that once carried her through decades of scrutiny. Inside Buckingham Palace, the machinery of the monarchy did not pause. Catherine, with the unshakable composure that had earned her the public's trust, began the meticulous process of reclaiming Diana's treasures. It was not just a matter of returning missing heirlooms, it was about restoring the sanctity of what had been taken. Every piece was accounted for, secured, and recorded. The chain of custody now tighter than it had been in decades. Staff spoke in hushed tones about the quiet determination with which she moved, aware that this was not simply about jewelry, but about protecting a legacy that could never again be compromised. Within the palace walls, a private message from Charles to his staff summed up the gravity of the moment. No one stands above legacy. It was both a warning and a vow, a reminder that the monarchy's survival depended not on sentiment, but on the preservation of its history and honor. For Camilla, the gates were now closed. The life she had fought to claim was locked behind them, beyond reach. But exile was just the end of the affair now. It was time to reclaim what Camilla had tried to take. One vault, one promise, and one future queen who would not let history be stolen twice. On July 8th, the palace moved with a precision that spoke not of ceremony, but of restoration. Catherine, accompanied only by the crown's chief archivist, descended into the royal vault, the same vault that weeks earlier had been violated. This was not a public act, nor was it a political one. It was deeply personal. Piece by piece, the treasures tied to Diana's name were checked, verified, and sealed under new layers of security. Biometric access was rewritten. The list of those permitted entry was reduced to a fraction, and Catherine's name stood at the top. Among the rows of velvet-lined cases, she paused over the ones that held the 1,981 Spencer choker, the 1,985 sapphire brooch, and the letters Diana had penned to William in the months before her death. She ensured each was secure before placing something of her own into the vault, a single envelope addressed in her handwriting. For Charlotte, in strength and memory. Love, Mummy. It was more than a note. It was a promise, a safeguard that the next generation would inherit not just the jewels, but the truth of the woman who had worn them. That same day, Kensington Palace released 2 photographs that seemed to ripple through the public consciousness with the force of a coronation. One showed Catherine standing before the newly sealed vault, her expression calm, her resolve unshakable. The other showed young Charlotte, holding a framed photograph of Diana, her small hands steady despite the gravity of what it symbolized. Within hours, the images were shared millions of times. To the public, they were more than pictures. They were proof that the legacy so many feared would be lost was now in the care of someone who understood its worth. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Public opinion, already shifting in Catherine's favor, now solidified. She was no longer just the Duchess of Cambridge, nor merely the Princess of Wales. She was the guardian of Diana's memory, the living embodiment of the monarchy's more compassionate, more human face. In Parliament, petitions began circulating, calling for her to be formally recognized in an elevated capacity within the royal structure. Commentators, political figures, and ordinary citizens alike agreed. The crown's moral authority now rested as much on her shoulders as on the sovereign's. Inside the palace, Charles made moves that went unannounced, but were no less significant. Quietly, he began to restructure succession protocols, ensuring that Catherine's influence and her guardianship of Diana's legacy could not be undermined in the years to come. It was a tacit acknowledgement that the monarchy's survival was tied to her presence, her integrity, and the trust she had so effortlessly earned. And as the public crowned Catherine in their hearts, Camilla's past sins began resurfacing, painting a portrait of betrayal decades in the making. Camilla didn't just lose her crown, she lost her place in history. On July 12th, without warning or public announcement, her profile vanished from the official Buckingham Palace website. One day, it sat alongside the sovereign's, polished with carefully chosen words. The next, it was erased, as if she had never walked the corridors of power. For the monarchy, it was a silent but definitive verdict. She no longer existed in the royal record. That absence spoke louder than any formal statement could. The media wasted no time filling the silence. Old scandals, long buried under years of careful image management, roared back into the spotlight. The infamous Tampon Gate. Tapes of the early 1990s resurfaced on television panels, reminding the public of the affair that had fractured Charles's first marriage. Investigative reporters dredged up whispers about other missing heirlooms from previous years, pieces that had quietly slipped away during her tenure, only now being connected in a pattern of misuse and opportunism. Each revelation layered on the perception that this had not been a single lapse in judgment, but the culmination of decades of quiet manipulation. Her allies began abandoning her with calculated speed. Longtime publicists severed contracts. Publishing houses that had been negotiating her memoir froze projects indefinitely, unwilling to risk the backlash. Even those within her extended family kept their distance, wary of being dragged into the storm that now surrounded her name. Financial inquiries began circling her children's ventures, with investigators scrutinizing the timing and sources of recent investments. For Camilla, the isolation was complete. She had not just been removed from royal life, she had been exiled from the networks and protections that once shielded her from scrutiny. In the public sphere, her absence was quickly filled by an entirely different image. Catherine and Charlotte began appearing at charity events, their presence captured in photographs that radiated continuity and renewal. These were not grand state occasions, but moments of quiet service, opening a children's literacy center, visiting community kitchens, supporting medical charities. Yet each appearance carried the weight of symbolism. The public didn't need to be told what they were seeing: the future of the monarchy, grounded in loyalty and compassion rather than scandal and self-interest. Opinion polls made it official. Across the UK and the Commonwealth, an overwhelming consensus emerged. Catherine was the true queen in spirit and legacy, regardless of titles. People spoke of her as Diana's natural heir, not by blood but by character. Where Camilla's tenure had been marked by controversy and division, Catherine's presence seemed to unify, to reassure, to restore faith in an institution that had been tested to its breaking point. And so, in the end, Camilla's downfall was not marked by a public spectacle, but by something more absolute: the quiet, methodical removal of her place in history, replaced by the ascendance of a woman who had never needed to grasp for power to claim it. The crown, once shaken, now stands unshakably reforged in loyalty, dignity, and the memory of a princess who still guards it from beyond. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.